The sun dipped low over the jagged horizon of Shoshone, Idaho, casting long shadows across Main Street as Rebecca Valerian pressed her back against the jailhouse wall, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Blood from a split lip trickled down her chin, staining the collar of her once pristine blue calico dress. Sheriff Holt Davis slammed his meaty fist onto the wooden desk, rattling the inkwell and sending droplets of black spattering across the confession paper he'd shoved in front of her. "Sign it, Miss Valerian. Make this easy on yourself," he growled, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Everyone in town knows you stole that money. Your pa's gambling debts ain't my concern." Rebecca's hands trembled as she stared at the damning words on the page. "I didn't take anything from the bank. I was nowhere near it when the robbery happened." Her voice, normally confident and clear, now wavered with fear and exhaustion after 3 hours of interrogation. Sheriff Davis leaned closer, his shadow engulfing her slender form. "Your pa owes my brother a fortune. Now the money's gone missing from his bank and you were seen riding out of town that very morning. Mighty suspicious, wouldn't you say?" "I was delivering medicine to the Whitaker farm," she protested, her green eyes flashing with indignation. "Mrs. Whitaker was about to have her baby. Ask Doc Wilson, he sent me." The sheriff's mouth twisted into an ugly smirk. "Doc Wilson left town yesterday. Convenient, ain't it? Now sign the confession, or I'll make sure your little sister ends up in that orphanage over in Boise." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. 14-year-old Sarah was all the family she had left since their parents died last winter. Working as the doctor's assistant barely kept food on their table. A prison sentence would destroy everything. Outside the jailhouse, dust kicked up from beneath the hooves of a chestnut stallion as it thundered down Main Street. Jake Northcott had been riding hard since dawn, his lean body bent low over the saddle, golden brown hair whipping in the wind. The telegram had reached him at the cattle drive camp just before sunrise. "Becca in trouble. Davis framing her. Come quick, Sarah." Jake's jaw clenched as he reined his horse to a stop outside the jailhouse. 3 years away from Shoshone had changed him, hardened him. The skinny ranch hand who'd left town with nothing but a broken heart and wounded pride had returned a man, his shoulders broader, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes sharper from seeing too much of the world's darker side. He'd loved Rebecca Valerian since they were 16, but her father had other plans for his daughter, plans that didn't include a penniless cowboy with dreams bigger than his pockets. Now, Jake had made something of himself, working as a U.S. Marshal out of Cheyenne. His return to Shoshone wasn't planned, but Sarah's desperate telegram had changed everything. Inside the jailhouse, Sheriff Davis grabbed Rebecca's wrist, forcing a pen into her trembling fingers. "Sign it now, or so help me." The door to the sheriff's office exploded inward, wood splintering around the lock as a heavy boot connected with it. In the doorway stood Jake, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying light, a silver Marshal's badge glinting on his chest and a Colt revolver steady in his hand. "Let her go, Davis," Jake commanded, his voice deeper than Rebecca remembered, harder around the edges. "Unless you want to add assaulting a federal marshal to your growing list of crimes." Rebecca's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. "Jake," she whispered, scarcely trusting her own vision. The boy she'd once loved had vanished, replaced by this formidable man whose very presence seemed to fill the small room. Sheriff Davis's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Jake's warning was clear. "Don't even think about it. I've got a warrant for your arrest, signed by Judge Carlton himself. Bank fraud, corruption, extortion. Seems you've been busy since I left town." Davis's face contorted with rage. "You've got no jurisdiction here, Northcott. This is my town. Not anymore." Jake took a step forward, his spurs jingling against the wooden floorboards. "The territorial governor sent me specifically after your brother Marcus Davis's bank ledgers raised some questions. Seems a lot of good folks have been losing their land to foreclosures that don't quite add up." Rebecca's mind reeled as she processed Jake's words. The Davis brothers had been squeezing the life out of Shoshone for years, but no one had dared stand against them. Until now. "Rebecca," Jake said, his eyes never leaving the sheriff, "step away from the desk and come over here." She didn't hesitate, pushing away from the confession paper and moving toward Jake. Sheriff Davis lunged for her, but Jake was faster. In one fluid motion, he holstered his gun and delivered a powerful right hook to Davis's jaw. The sheriff staggered backward, crashing into his desk. "That's for putting your hands on her," Jake said, flexing his fingers. Outside, horses and voices approached backup. Jake had telegraphed from the next town over. Sheriff Davis knew he was cornered, desperation flashing in his eyes as he calculated his odds. "Rebecca," Jake said softly, "go outside. Deputy Marshal Wilson is waiting." "Wilson?" she asked, confused. "As in Doc Wilson." Jake's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "His brother. We've been working this case together for months. Go on now." Rebecca moved toward the door, but as she passed Davis, the sheriff made one final desperate grab for her. His fingers snagged her sleeve, yanking her backward as he reached for a hidden derringer in his boot. Jake reacted instantly, throwing himself forward. The two men collided as Rebecca stumbled free, the small pistol discharging with a deafening crack in the confined space. Time seemed to freeze as smoke curled from the derringer's barrel. Both men stood motionless for a heartbeat before Sheriff Davis crumpled to the floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest where the bullet had ricocheted and struck him instead of its intended target. Rebecca stood paralyzed, her ears ringing from the gunshot. Jake quickly disarmed the fallen sheriff and checked for a pulse. "He'll live," Jake pronounced grimly, "though he might wish otherwise once he's standing trial." The door burst open again as two deputies rushed in, weapons drawn. Jake displayed his marshal's badge, explaining the situation with terse efficiency. Within minutes, Sheriff Davis was being treated by a doctor while remaining under guard. Rebecca found herself outside on the jailhouse steps, the evening air cool against her flushed skin. Her mind struggled to process everything that had happened: the false accusations, Jake's return, the revelation of the Davis brothers' corruption. "Rebecca." Jake emerged from the jailhouse, concern etched on his features as he approached her. "Are you hurt?" She touched her split lip self-consciously. "It's nothing." His expression darkened. "It's not nothing. Davis will answer for that too." In the fading light, she studied the man before her. The boy she'd known was still there somewhere, in the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he almost smiled, in the way he tucked his thumbs into his belt when he was thinking. But time and distance had transformed him into someone both familiar and foreign. "You're a marshal now," she stated, noting the badge he wore with evident pride. "For 2 years," he confirmed. "Turns out I had a knack for tracking down trouble." Rebecca nodded, suddenly uncertain what to say to the man whose heart she'd broken on her father's orders. "Jake, Miss Rebecca." Sarah's voice cut through the tension as the younger Valerian sister ran toward them, her blonde braids bouncing with each step. "You're all right." Rebecca embraced her sister tightly. "Thanks to your telegram to Jake." Sarah beamed up at the tall Marshal. "I knew you'd come." "You always said you'd help us if we ever needed you." Jake's expression softened as he looked at the younger girl. "I keep my promises, Sarah. Always have." The night that followed was a blur of activity. Jake and his fellow marshals secured the jailhouse and the Davis brothers' bank. Documents were seized, statements taken from townspeople suddenly brave enough to speak out about the corruption that had strangled Shoshone for years. Rebecca and Sarah returned to their small home on the edge of town, a modest cabin their father had built with his own hands before gambling and whiskey had consumed him. As Rebecca prepared a simple supper, her thoughts kept returning to Jake's unexpected return. "He still loves you," Sarah said matter-of-factly as she set their worn table. Rebecca nearly dropped the pot of stew she was carrying. "That was a long time ago, Sarah. We were different people then." "Maybe," her sister conceded with a wisdom beyond her 14 years, "but the way he looked at you hasn't changed." Before Rebecca could formulate a response, a knock at their door interrupted the conversation. Jake stood on their porch, his hat in his hands, looking almost boyish in his uncertainty. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice gentler than it had been at the jailhouse. Rebecca tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Not at all. We were just about to have supper. Would you like to join us?" The relief in his eyes was palpable. "I'd be honored." That night, over a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, the three of them cautiously navigated the years of absence. Sarah, delighted by Jake's stories of his travels, peppered him with questions about life as a marshal. Rebecca remained more reserved, observing the changes in him, wondering what had transpired during those 3 years to transform the carefree cowboy she'd known into this serious lawman. As Sarah cleared the dishes, Jake finally addressed what hung unspoken between them. "I didn't come back to dredge up the past, Rebecca. When Sarah's telegram reached me, I only thought about getting to you in time." Rebecca's fingers twisted the worn fabric of her apron. "I never thought I'd see you again after everything." Jake's gaze was steady. "Your father made his position clear. I wasn't good enough for his daughter. Maybe he was right." "No," she said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "He wasn't right about that or about many things." "I should have." "It doesn't matter now," Jake interrupted gently. "What matters is keeping you and Sarah safe until this business with the Davis brothers is concluded. Their reach extends beyond Shoshone and they have dangerous friends." Rebecca straightened her shoulders, her green eyes flashing with determination. "We've faced worse. After Father died, we managed on our own through that terrible winter." Jake's expression softened. "I heard about your parents. I'm sorry I wasn't here." The sincerity in his voice threatened to unravel the careful defenses she'd built around her heart. "You're here now," she said softly. "Thank you for coming when Sarah called." As Jake prepared to leave, promising to return the next morning, Rebecca stood in the doorway watching him mount his horse. The moonlight silvered his profile, and for a moment she glimpsed the boy she'd once loved in the man he'd become. "Be careful, Jake," she called, unable to shake a sense of foreboding. "The Davis brothers don't forgive easily." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Neither do I, Rebecca. Neither do I." As his horse disappeared into the darkness, Rebecca closed the door, unaware that miles away, Marcus Davis was already planning his revenge against the marshal who had arrested his brother and the woman who stood at the center of it all. The next morning dawned clear and bright over Shoshone. Rebecca rose early, as was her habit since taking over Doc Wilson's duties during his absence. The small room at the back of the doctor's office served as the town's medical facility, and patients often arrived at first light. As she gathered her medical bag, Sarah appeared in the doorway of their small house, her expression troubled. "You have to go to the office today, after what happened yesterday." Rebecca smiled reassuringly at her sister. People still need medical care, even with the sheriff in custody. Besides, Jake said he'd meet us there later to discuss what happens next. Sarah's worried expression didn't fade. Marcus Davis is still free. What if he comes looking for you? Rebecca hesitated, the reality of their situation settling over her like a shadow. Marcus Davis, the elder of the brothers and owner of Shoshone's only bank, was indeed a more dangerous threat than the sheriff had ever been. Calculating and cold where his brother was hot-headed and impulsive, Marcus had built his fortune on the broken dreams of others. Deputy Marshal Wilson has men watching the bank and the Davis estate, Rebecca assured her sister, repeating what Jake had told them the previous evening. And I won't be alone at the office. Mrs. Hargrove is bringing her new baby for a checkup, and Mr. Tanner's gout is acting up again. Sarah reluctantly nodded, though concern still clouded her young face. At 14, she had already endured more hardship than many twice her age. Their mother's death from pneumonia, followed by their father's fatal accident at the lumber mill, which many suspected was no accident at all, had left the sisters to fend for themselves. Rebecca's apprenticeship with Doc Wilson had been their salvation. "I'll come by the mercantile after you finish your shift," Rebecca promised. Sarah had been working at Cooper's mercantile 3 days a week, learning bookkeeping from Mrs. Cooper. "We can walk home together." The morning passed uneventfully at the doctor's office. Rebecca treated 3 patients, prepared herbal tinctures, and organized the medical supplies. By noon, she was reviewing Doc Wilson's patient journals when the office door opened. Jake stood in the doorway, his expression grim. The morning light highlighted the fatigue lining his face, suggesting he'd had little sleep. "What's wrong?" Rebecca asked immediately, setting aside her work. Jake closed the door behind him, his spurs jingling softly as he crossed the room. "Marcus Davis is missing. His house was empty when my men went to arrest him this morning. His private safe was cleared out." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. "He's run. Or he's planning something," Jake countered, his voice tight with concern. "I've got men searching the area, but Davis knows this territory better than we do. He has friends in high places, too." Rebecca's mind raced with the implications. "Sarah is safe," Jake assured her quickly. "I've already been to the mercantile. Mrs. Cooper is keeping her inside, and I have a deputy watching the place." Relief flooded through Rebecca, but it was short-lived. "What about the charges against me?" "The confession Sheriff Davis was trying to force me to sign." Jake's expression softened slightly. "That was part of their scheme. From what we've pieced together, the Davis brothers have been embezzling from the bank for years. They needed a scapegoat for the missing funds. Your father owed them money, and they saw an opportunity to settle the debt by framing you." The callousness of the plot stunned Rebecca. "They were willing to send me to prison just to cover their theft." "They've done worse," Jake said grimly. "We found evidence linking them to at least 2 suspicious deaths of landowners who refused to sell to them. Judge Carlton is preparing warrants now." Rebecca sank into the nearest chair, the magnitude of the Davis brothers' crimes overwhelming her. "All this time they've been, and no one stopped them." "People were afraid," Jake said, his voice gentling as he knelt beside her chair. "Men like the Davis brothers thrive on fear. But that ends now." He reached out tentatively, his calloused hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch sent an unexpected flutter through her chest, a sensation she'd thought long forgotten. "Rebecca," he said, her name soft on his lips, "I need to get you and Sarah somewhere safe until Marcus is apprehended. I have a friend with a ranch about 20 miles north. You'd be well protected there." She withdrew her hand, standing abruptly. "I can't leave Shoshone. I'm the only medical provider with Doc Wilson gone. People depend on me." Jake stood as well, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. And what good will you be to them if Marcus Davis gets to you first? He's desperate and dangerous. I won't live in fear, Rebecca insisted, lifting her chin defiantly. I won't let him drive me from my home. Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from their youth that it made Rebecca's heart ache with remembrance. You're just as stubborn as ever, he muttered. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth despite the tension. And you're just as overprotective. Their eyes met, and for a moment the years between them seemed to evaporate. The air in the small office grew charged with unspoken feelings, memories of stolen kisses behind the schoolhouse, promises whispered under summer stars. The moment was shattered by the sound of running footsteps outside. Jake's hand instinctively moved to his gun as the door burst open to reveal Mrs. Cooper, the mercantile owner's wife, her face flushed with exertion and fear. "Marshal, come quick," she gasped. "Men just rode into town rough-looking sorts. They went straight to the bank." Jake was moving before she finished speaking. "Stay here," he ordered Rebecca. "Lock the door behind me." But Rebecca was already reaching for her medical bag. "If there's trouble, you might need me." "Damn it, Rebecca," Jake began, but she cut him off. "I'm coming, Jake. I'm not that helpless girl you left behind anymore." Their gazes locked in a brief battle of wills before Jake gave a curt nod. "Stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" Together they hurried down Main Street toward the bank, a handsome brick building that stood as a testament to the Davis family's wealth and influence in Shoshone. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, watching as 4 mounted men conferred outside the bank's entrance. The sight of Jake's marshal's badge approaching sent a visible ripple of tension through the group. "That's Rattlesnake Reed," Mrs. Cooper whispered, pointing to a lean, scar-faced man astride a black gelding. "He rides with the Blackwater gang. They robbed the stage to boys last month, killed the driver." Jake's expression hardened as he assessed the situation. "Rebecca, I want you to go back to the doctor's office now." "But no arguments," he said firmly. "These men are killers. If they're working for Marcus Davis, they won't hesitate to use you to get to me." Before Rebecca could respond, the bank's doors swung open and Marcus Davis emerged, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. He carried a large satchel, presumably filled with banknotes and valuables. His eyes widened when he spotted Jake and Rebecca standing among the onlookers. "There she is," Marcus shouted, pointing directly at Rebecca. "The thief who stole from my bank. $500 to the man who brings her to me." The declaration sent a shock through the crowd. Jake immediately stepped in front of Rebecca, his hand on his gun. "Marcus Davis," he called out, his voice carrying across the street, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Tell your men to stand down." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "You have no authority here, Marshal." "This is my town." "Not anymore," Jake replied steadily. "The territorial governor has ordered this bank seized pending investigation. Your brother has already confessed to your schemes." It was a bluff. Sheriff Davis had admitted nothing, but the claim had the desired effect. Doubt flickered across Marcus's face, and he glanced uncertainly at his hired guns. Rattlesnake Reed spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "We ain't being paid to fight no federal marshals, Davis. You said this was just a simple collection job." Marcus's desperation was palpable. "She stole from me," he insisted, jabbing a finger toward Rebecca. "Everything was fine until she interfered." Jake took a step forward, his posture radiating authority. "The only thief here is you, Davis. We have your ledgers, your correspondence with land speculators. It's over." For a moment, it seemed Marcus might surrender. Then, with startling swiftness, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small revolver. "It's not over until I say it's over." The shot rang out before anyone could react. Rebecca felt Jake's body jerk against hers as he shoved her aside, taking the bullet meant for her. He staggered but remained standing, drawing his own weapon in one fluid motion. His return fire was precise, striking Marcus in the shoulder and sending the banker sprawling in the dirt. Chaos erupted. The hired guns, seeing their employer fall and recognizing the skill of the marshal who had shot him, made the practical decision to abandon their contract. They wheeled their horses around and galloped out of town as Deputy Marshal Wilson and his men converged on the scene. Rebecca's medical training took over as she rushed to Jake's side. Blood stained his shirt just below his left collarbone. "How bad?" he grimaced, his face pale beneath his tan. "Bad enough," she replied, already tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the bleeding. "But you'll live, I'll make sure of it." As deputies secured Marcus Davis and townspeople emerged from hiding to witness the outlaw banker's arrest, Rebecca focused solely on the wounded man before her. Jake's eyes never left her face as she worked, his expression a mixture of pain and something deeper, more complex. "You were supposed to run if there was trouble," he murmured as she helped him to his feet. "And you were supposed to not get shot," she countered, supporting his weight against her side. "I guess neither of us is very good at following orders." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Some things never change." Together, they made their way back to the doctor's office, where Rebecca could properly treat Jake's wound. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without hitting bone or major vessels, a fortunate outcome that did little to ease Rebecca's distress as she cleaned and bandaged the injury. "You could have been killed," she said softly, her hands gentle as she secured the bandage. Jake caught her wrist as she pulled away, his fingers warm against her pulse. "So could you. Marcus was aiming for you, Rebecca." She met his gaze, seeing the concern there and something else, something that made her heart beat faster despite the day's dangers. "Why did you really come back to Shoshone, Jake? It wasn't just Sarah's telegram, was it?" His thumb traced small circles on the inside of her wrist. "I'd been tracking the Davis brothers' operation for months. Their banking scheme crossed territorial lines, which brought it under federal jurisdiction. When Sarah's message came, it just accelerated my timeline. So you would have returned even without her telegram." Jake's eyes, blue as the summer sky, held her steadily. "I would have come back for you eventually, Rebecca. I just needed to be worthy first." The simple honesty of his words threatened to unravel all the careful defenses she'd built around her heart. "Jake, my father was wrong about you. I was wrong to let him dictate my choices." "You were 18, he said gently. "I was asking you to leave everything behind for an uncertain future with a man who had nothing to offer but promises." Rebecca shook her head, feeling the weight of regret for 3 lost years. "You offered me love. That should have been enough." The door to the doctor's office swung open before Jake could respond, and Sarah burst in, her face tear-streaked and frantic. "Rebecca." "I heard shooting. They said the marshal was hit." She stopped short at the sight of Jake sitting shirtless on the examination table, his shoulder bandaged. Relief washed over her young face, followed quickly by embarrassment at his state of undress. "Oh. I'm sorry, I didn't." "It's all right," Jake said, reaching for his bloodied shirt. Rebecca stopped him with a gentle hand. "Don't you dare put that filthy thing back on," she scolded. "Sarah, run to Pearson's store and buy the marshal a new shirt. Tell Mr. Pearson to put it on my account." As Sarah hurried off on her errand, a comfortable silence settled between Rebecca and Jake. Outside, they could hear the town coming back to life, voices raised in excitement rather than fear, the news of Marcus Davis's arrest spreading from person to person. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked finally, busying herself with cleaning her medical instruments. Jake watched her movements with thoughtful eyes. Marcus and Sheriff Davis will be transported to the territorial capital for trial. Deputy Marshal Wilson will remain in Shoshone until a proper election can be held for a new sheriff. The bank will be temporarily managed by a court-appointed administrator until the Davis brothers' assets can be sorted out. Rebecca nodded, absorbing the information. And you? What happens to you now? He hesitated, and in that pause, Rebecca felt the weight of possibility and potential heartbreak. That depends, he said at last. On what? On whether there's anything keeping me in Shoshone once my official duties are complete. Rebecca's hands stilled over her instruments. Slowly, she turned to face him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. And if there was, something keeping you here, I mean. Jake stood, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. In 2 steps, he closed the distance between them. His good arm encircled her waist, drawing her gently against him. Then I might consider requesting a permanent assignment to this territory. Marshals can choose their home base, you know. Rebecca's hands came to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. Is that what you want, to make Shoshone your home again? His face was serious, his eyes searching hers for answers to unasked questions. Shoshone was never home, Rebecca. You were, you still are. The simplicity of his declaration undid her. 3 years of loneliness, of wondering what might have been, of building a life without him, all of it crystallized in this moment of truth between them. I never stopped loving you, she whispered, the confession both terrifying and liberating. Even when I told myself I had to, even when I convinced myself you'd forgotten all about me. Jake's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. I tried to forget, rode clear to California and back. Took the most dangerous assignments hoping they'd drive you from my mind. Nothing worked. The distance between them disappeared as Jake lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a reacquaintance after years apart, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more honest. Rebecca's arms wound around his neck, careful of his injury, as she surrendered to the feelings she'd denied for too long. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. I'm not letting you go again, Rebecca Valerian. Not for any man's disapproval, not for any amount of money, not for anything in this world. She smiled up at him, joy bubbling through her veins like the finest champagne. I wouldn't let you if you tried, Jake Northcott. Not this time. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity in Shoshone. The Davis brothers were transported to Boise for trial, their criminal enterprise dismantled piece by piece as investigators uncovered the full extent of their corruption. Properties that had been unlawfully seized were returned to their rightful owners. Debts that had been artificially inflated were reassessed and often forgiven entirely. For Rebecca and Sarah, life changed in unexpected ways. The territorial court ruled that their father's debt to the Davis brothers was invalid, the result of fraudulent interest rates and manipulated contracts. The small ranch that had been their family home for generations was legally theirs once more, free and clear. Jake's shoulder healed under Rebecca's attentive care. His superiors, impressed with his handling of the Davis case, approved his request for permanent assignment to the Idaho territory, with Shoshone as his base of operations. The town, grateful for his role in ending the Davis brothers' reign of terror, offered him the position of sheriff once the territorial administration was complete. On a crisp autumn morning 6 months after Jake had kicked down the jailhouse door, Rebecca stood in the bedroom of the Valerian ranch house, allowing Sarah to fasten the last buttons of her wedding gown. You look beautiful, Sarah said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. The dress, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace, had been their mother's, carefully preserved in a cedar chest for just such an occasion. Rebecca smoothed her hands over the fabric, emotion tightening her throat. "I wish she could be here today." Sarah squeezed her sister's hand. "She is, in a way. So is Father the real him, not the broken man he became at the end." A knock at the bedroom door interrupted the moment. "Are you decent?" came Mrs. Cooper's voice. "The groom is getting mighty anxious out there." Rebecca laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Tell him patience is a virtue." The ceremony took place in the meadow behind the ranch house, where wildflowers still bloomed in defiant splendor against the approaching winter. The entire town of Shoshone turned out to witness the union of their beloved doctor's assistant and the marshal who had saved them all. Jake waited beneath an arch of twisted willow branches, looking so handsome in his new suit that Rebecca's steps faltered when she first saw him. His eyes never left her as she walked toward him on the arm of Doc Wilson, who had returned from his journey just in time to give the bride away. Their vows were simple but profound, promises of fidelity and partnership spoken under the vast Idaho sky. When Jake slipped the gold band onto Rebecca's finger, a ring he'd carried in his pocket since leaving Shoshone 3 years earlier, there wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride, Marshal Northcott." Jake's smile was radiant as he gathered Rebecca in his arms. "Finally," he murmured against her lips, before kissing her with a tenderness that belied the strength in his embrace. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing beneath lanterns strung from the old oak trees. As the evening deepened, Jake found Rebecca sitting on the porch steps, watching their friends and neighbors enjoying the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Northcott?" he asked, settling beside her and taking her hand in his. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, contentment warming her from within. "More than I ever thought possible. And you? Any regrets about tying yourself to a small-town doctor's assistant?" Jake lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Only that I wasted 3 years being too proud to come back sooner." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sarah dance with young Tom Cooper, the merchant's son who'd been sweet on her for months. "I received a letter from the territorial governor yesterday," Jake said after a while. "He's appointed me as special investigator for banking corruption throughout Idaho. It means some travel, but Shoshone would remain our home base." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Doc Wilson's talking about retirement next year. He's offered to sell me his practice." Jake turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "You'd be the only female doctor in the territory." "Not officially a doctor," she corrected him. "But with his recommendation and my experience, the medical board might grant me a special license." "It would mean some study in boys, perhaps a few months away." Jake's arm tightened around her. "I'd wait, however long it takes." Rebecca's heart swelled with love for this man who supported her dreams as fervently as his own. "We've waited long enough, don't you think, for everything?" His kiss was answer enough, a promise of the life they would build together, a life delayed but not denied, a love tested by time and circumstance but ultimately triumphant. As they rejoined the celebration, Rebecca couldn't help but reflect on how close she'd come to losing everything. If Jake hadn't returned when he did, if he hadn't kicked down that jailhouse door before she signed the false confession. She shuddered to think what might have been. "Cold?" Jake asked, immediately shrugging out of his jacket to drape it around her shoulders. Rebecca smiled up at her husband, marveling at how perfectly they fit together now, how right it felt to be by his side. "Not anymore," she assured him. "Not ever again." Spring came early to Shoshone the following year, bringing with it new beginnings for the town and its inhabitants. The Davis brothers were convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and in Marcus's case, attempted murder. Their sentences, 20 years in the territorial prison, ensured they would never again threaten the peace of the small Idaho community. Jake had settled into his role as both town sheriff and territorial investigator with natural ease. His reputation for fairness and integrity spread throughout Idaho, bringing a steady stream of cases that required his particular talents. Rebecca, now officially Dr. Rebecca Northcott, after completing her medical certification in boys, divided her time between caring for the town's medical needs and assisting her husband with the occasional investigation. Their home, the renovated Valerian ranch house, became a gathering place for friends and a haven for those in need. Sarah, now 16 and apprenticed to Mrs. Cooper as the mercantile's bookkeeper, had blossomed into a confident young woman with dreams of attending college in California someday. On a warm evening in May, Rebecca sat on their front porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sound of a horse approaching drew her attention, and she smiled as Jake's familiar figure appeared on the road, returning from his day's work in town. He dismounted with practiced grace, leading his horse to the water trough before joining her on the porch. His kiss, warm and tender, still sent butterflies dancing through her stomach even after a year of marriage. "You're home early," she observed as he settled beside her on the swing. "Quiet day," he replied, stretching his long legs out before him. "No outlaws to chase, no bank robbers to apprehend, just paperwork and Mrs. Tanner complaining about her neighbor's chickens in her garden again." Rebecca laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "A proper crisis requiring the sheriff's full attention." "I suggested a fence," Jake said dryly. Somehow, I don't think that satisfied her. They fell into comfortable silence, the swing's gentle motion lulling them as twilight deepened around the ranch. Rebecca's hand found Jake's, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people wholly connected. "I visited Mrs. Whitaker today," Rebecca said after a while. "Her little boy has finally kicked that cough." Jake nodded, remembering the frantic night 2 weeks prior when Rebecca had been called to the Whitaker farm for the desperately ill child. "That's good news. Thomas would have been lost without you." "It wasn't just me," Rebecca demurred. The new medicines Doc Wilson brought back from his conference in San Francisco made the difference. Jake turned to face her, his expression earnest. "You're too modest, Rebecca. This town is healthier because of you." "The territorial doctor was telling me just last week that Shoshone has the lowest infant mortality rate in Idaho now." Rebecca flushed with pleasure at the compliment. Her dedication to improving maternal and infant care had become a personal mission since taking over the practice. "Speaking of babies," she began, her voice taking on a deliberately casual tone, "I had an interesting consultation today." "Oh," Jake prompted, reaching to brush a strand of hair from her face. Rebecca took a deep breath, her heart racing with anticipation. "Yes, a very promising case. The patient appears to be approximately 8 weeks along, healthy, strong heartbeat." Jake's hand stilled against her cheek as comprehension dawned in his eyes. "Rebecca, are you saying?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "We're going to have a baby, Jake. Around Christmas, if my calculations are correct." For a moment, Jake seemed frozen in place, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby pasture, he lifted Rebecca from the swing and spun her in a circle. "Careful." She laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "I may be a doctor, but I'm not immune to dizziness." Jake set her gently on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist as he gazed down at her with wonder. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." His palm spread reverently across her still flat stomach, and Rebecca covered his hand with her own. "Our baby," she confirmed softly. Jake gathered her close, his embrace gentle but fervent. "I love you, Rebecca Northcott, more than I have words to say." She tilted her face up to his, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. "Then show me instead," she whispered against his lips. Later that night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Jake's hand protectively curved around her abdomen. Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this perfect moment. From the terror of that day in the sheriff's office to the joy of creating new life together, their path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet every step, every challenge had led them here to a love stronger for having been tested, a happiness more profound for having been earned. "What are you thinking about?" Jake murmured against her hair, his voice drowsy with contentment. Rebecca smiled in the darkness, nestling closer to the warmth of her husband's body. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. If the Davis brothers hadn't tried to frame me, if you hadn't come back when you did, I would have found my way back to you eventually," Jake assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are meant to be, Rebecca. Some loves can't be broken, no matter how hard the world tries." She believed him. In the safe circle of his arms, with their child growing beneath her heart, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was always meant to be. Not because fate had decreed it, but because they had fought for it, because when faced with separation and hardship, they had chosen each other, chosen love, chosen to build a life together against all odds. "Our child will have quite the story to tell about how his parents found each other again," Rebecca mused, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on Jake's chest. "His?" Jake questioned, amusement coloring his tone. "Are you making a professional diagnosis, doctor?" Rebecca chuckled softly. "Just a feeling, a mother's intuition, perhaps. Boy or girl, they'll be perfect," Jake declared with absolute conviction. "Strong like their mother, stubborn like both of us." "Poor child," Rebecca teased. "Doomed from the start." Jake's laughter rumbled through his chest. "Blessed from the start," he corrected gently. "To be born from love like ours." As summer ripened into autumn, Rebecca's body changed with the seasons. Her slender form softened and rounded, the evidence of their coming child impossible to hide by September. The news spread through Shoshone with typical small-town swiftness, bringing a steady stream of well-wishers bearing gifts and advice for the expectant parents. Jake found himself the recipient of knowing slaps on the back and good-natured teasing from the men of the town. Rebecca endured a constant barrage of remedies for morning sickness and predictions about the baby's gender based on everything from the shape of her belly to the foods she craved. "If I eat one more pickle, I think I'll turn into one," Rebecca complained one evening as Jake rubbed her swollen feet after a long day at the clinic. "Mrs. Hargrove brought over an entire jar today, insisting they were the only thing that helped her through her last pregnancy." Jake chuckled, his thumbs working magic on her aching arches. "At least it's better than what Deputy Collins suggested. According to him, my father drank whiskey for a week straight before he was born, and look how well he turned out." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Collins broke his own nose last month trying to mount his horse backward on a dare." "Exactly my point," Jake said with a wink. "Clearly a paragon of good decision-making." Their laughter filled the cozy sitting room, a sound that had become delightfully common in the Northcott household. Even as Rebecca's pregnancy progressed and physical discomforts increased, their happiness only seemed to deepen, their anticipation growing with each passing day. One crisp November afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the yard, and the scent of apple pie filled the kitchen, a knock at the door interrupted Rebecca's baking. She wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and went to answer, surprised to find Judge Carlton on her doorstep. "Judge," she greeted him warmly, "this is an unexpected pleasure. Jake's in town, but I expect him back shortly if you'd like to wait." The elderly jurist who had presided over the Davis brothers' trial removed his hat respectfully. "Actually, Dr. Northcott, it's you I've come to see." "May I come in?" Rebecca ushered him into the sitting room, curiosity piqued by his formal manner. As they settled with cups of tea, the judge withdrew an official-looking document from his briefcase. "I've just come from Boise," he explained. "The territorial governor asked me to deliver this personally." He handed the document to Rebecca, who unfolded it with questioning eyes. As she read, her hand flew to her mouth in astonishment. Is this real?" she asked, scarcely believing the words on the page. Judge Carlton nodded, his weathered face creased in a smile. "Entirely real. The first of its kind in the territory, in fact. A formal medical license issued to a woman, recognizing your education, experience, and exceptional service to the people of Idaho." Rebecca stared at the license bearing her name, emotions overwhelming her. For years, she had practiced under special dispensation due to the shortage of qualified doctors, but without official recognition. This document changed everything: her status, her authority, her future opportunities. But how? The medical board has been so resistant to licensing women physicians. "Your reputation preceded you," the judge said simply. "When the governor's wife developed complications during her recent confinement and you were called to Boise to assist, you made quite an impression. Saving both mother and child tends to generate goodwill in high places." Rebecca remembered the frantic journey to the territorial capital, the 3 days and nights of intensive care for the governor's wife and premature infant. She had never expected such recognition to result from doing what she considered her duty. "There's more," Judge Carlton continued. "The governor is establishing a commission to improve medical care throughout the territory, particularly for women and children in rural areas. He would like you to serve as an advisor." Before Rebecca could respond, the front door opened and Jake's voice called out, "Rebecca! Whose horse is that outside?" As he entered the sitting room and saw their distinguished visitor, Jake straightened, automatically assuming his official demeanor. "Judge Carlton, this is an honor, sir." The judge rose to shake Jake's hand. "I was just sharing some news with your wife that I think you'll both find interesting." As Rebecca explained the unexpected developments, Jake's face transformed with pride and joy. When she finished, he crossed the room to embrace her, careful of her pregnant form. "I always knew they'd recognize what I've seen all along," he said softly. "You're extraordinary, Rebecca Northcott, in every possible way." Judge Carlton cleared his throat, his expression amused but approving. "There is one caveat to the commission appointment, Doctor. Given your impending happy event, the governor suggests you might wish to delay your active participation until spring." Rebecca laughed, resting a hand on her prominent belly. "I think that's wise counsel, Judge. This little one seems determined to make a punctual arrival at Christmas, and I suspect my hands will be quite full for a few months thereafter." As winter settled over Shoshone, blanketing the town in pristine white, the Northcott household prepared for 2 momentous events: Christmas and the birth of their first child. Jake had spent weeks crafting a cradle from polished oak, while Rebecca sewed tiny garments in the evenings, each stitch a testament to their growing anticipation. Sarah, excited about becoming an aunt, had moved temporarily into town to stay with the Coopers, giving the expectant parents space while remaining close enough to help when the time came. The arrangement had the added benefit of allowing her to spend more time with young Tom Cooper, whose affection for her had only deepened over the past year. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside their windows, Rebecca and Jake sat before the fire in their sitting room. The house was festive with pine boughs and red ribbons, a small tree glittering with candles in the corner. Jake had just finished reading A Visit from St. Nicholas, a tradition Rebecca remembered from her own childhood. "You think next year we'll be reading to a wide-eyed toddler?" Rebecca mused, her hands cradling her belly where the baby shifted restlessly. Jake set aside the book, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. "I can picture it perfectly. A little girl with your green eyes and curls, or maybe a boy with your determination and my unfortunate cowlick." Rebecca laughed, then suddenly gasped, her face registering surprise. "What is it?" Jake asked, immediately alert. "The baby," Rebecca nodded, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I think it might be time, Jake." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Jake rode through the snow-covered night to fetch Mrs. Cooper, who had assisted at dozens of births before Rebecca came to Shoshone, and to send word to Dr. Wilson that his former apprentice was in labor. By dawn on Christmas morning, as the first pale light illuminated the fresh snow outside, Rebecca's labor had intensified. Jake remained steadfast at her side, wiping her brow, supporting her through each contraction, his face a mask of concern and love. "You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Cooper encouraged as she examined Rebecca. "The baby's head is crowning, not much longer now." Rebecca gripped Jake's hand with surprising strength. "Tell me again," she panted between contractions, "about the trip we'll take to San Francisco when the baby is older." Jake understood her need for distraction, for something to focus on besides the pain. "We'll stay at the Palace Hotel," he began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil at seeing her suffering. "Sarah can come too if she likes. We'll walk along the bay and see ships from all over the world. There's a Chinese quarter with food like you've never tasted, and theaters with performances every night." Rebecca nodded, clinging to his words as another contraction built. And the medical college. Will we visit?" "Absolutely," Jake promised, supporting her as she bore down. "You can meet with the professors, show them how medicine should really be practiced. Maybe give a few lectures yourself." A cry of pain escaped Rebecca's lips as the final stages of labor claimed her full attention. Mrs. Cooper positioned herself to receive the baby, her experienced hands ready. "One more push, Rebecca," she instructed calmly. "Your child is almost here." With a last monumental effort, Rebecca brought their baby into the world. The room filled with a lusty cry as Mrs. Cooper efficiently cleared the newborn's airways and wrapped the tiny form in a warm blanket. "You have a beautiful son," she announced, placing the swaddled infant on Rebecca's chest. "Born on Christmas Day, just as you predicted." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she gazed at their child for the first time. "Jake, look at him. He's perfect." Jake found himself unable to speak, overcome by the sight of his wife and newborn son. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, a shock of dark hair plastered to his tiny head, his fists clenched as if ready to take on the world. To Jake, he was the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. With gentle fingers, he touched his son's cheek, marveling at the softness of his skin. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "We've been waiting for you," as Mrs. Cooper discreetly busied herself with the practical aftermath of birth. Jake and Rebecca shared this sacred moment of new parenthood, their faces reflecting wonder and profound gratitude. "What shall we call him?" Jake asked softly, his finger now captured in his son's surprisingly strong grip. Rebecca studied the baby's face thoughtfully. "I was thinking William after my father, William James Northcott. We could call him Will." Jake nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "William James. It's a strong name for a boy born on Christmas." As the winter sun rose higher, casting golden light across the snow-covered landscape, news of William James Northcott's arrival spread through Shoshone. Throughout the day, friends came bearing gifts and good wishes, though Mrs. Cooper firmly limited visits to protect the new mother's rest. That evening, with the baby sleeping peacefully in his new cradle, Jake sat on the edge of their bed, watching Rebecca as she drifted in and out of exhausted slumber. The magnitude of what they had created together, not just their son, but the life they shared, the love they had fought for, filled his heart to overflowing. When Rebecca's eyes fluttered open and found his, Jake reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Thank you," he said simply. She smiled, sleepy but radiant. "For what?" "For giving me a family," he replied. "For being brave enough to love me, even when it wasn't easy. For waiting until I found my way back to you." Rebecca's free hand moved to caress his cheek. "We found our way back to each other, Jake. And now we've created a new path forward together." From the cradle came a small, indignant cry, announcing that William James was awake and hungry. Jake carefully lifted his son, marveling anew at how small and precious he was, and brought him to Rebecca. As she settled the baby at her breast, Jake stretched out beside them, his arm protectively encircling them both. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent in the gathering dusk, but inside the Northcott home, warmth and love created a sanctuary against the winter night. "Merry Christmas, Jake," Rebecca murmured. Her eyes filled with contentment as she gazed down at their nursing son. Jake pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to the downy crown of his son's head. "Merry Christmas, my loves." In that perfect moment, Jake reflected on how differently their story might have ended. If he hadn't received Sarah's telegram, if he hadn't kicked down that jailhouse door before Rebecca could sign the false confession. But fate, or perhaps something more deliberate than chance, had intervened, giving them this second opportunity at happiness. As William finished nursing and dozed off again, his tiny face peaceful in sleep, Jake made a silent promise to his son. He would tell him someday about the journey that had brought his parents together, about perseverance and forgiveness, about fighting for what matters most, about how love, when it's real and true, finds a way to overcome even the greatest obstacles. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked softly, noticing his contemplative expression. Jake smiled, tightening his embrace around his family. "I'm thinking that some stories are worth waiting for, and ours is just beginning." The years flowed by like the gentle current of the Snake River that meandered near Shoshone. William James Northcott grew from a determined infant into a curious toddler, then a thoughtful boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's inquisitive nature. By his 5th birthday, he had been joined by a sister, Emma Rose, whose arrival coincided with Rebecca's appointment as the first female physician on the Idaho Territorial Medical Board. Jake's career had evolved as well. Though he maintained his position as sheriff of Shoshone County, his reputation for fairness and integrity had led to his appointment as special judicial investigator for the territorial courts, a role that occasionally took him to Boise or even as far as Portland. He always returned home with stories and small treasures for his children, his love for his family only deepening with each reunion. Sarah, now 24, had fulfilled her dream of attending college in San Francisco, returning to Idaho with a teaching certificate and a fiancé, a young doctor she had met during her studies. Their wedding, held in the garden of the Northcott Ranch on a perfect June day, had been the social event of the season in Shoshone. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Jake had kicked down the jailhouse door, saving Rebecca from signing the false confession that would have changed both their lives irrevocably. They stood together on the front porch of their home, watching their children play in the twilight. 10 years, Rebecca marveled, leaning against her husband's solid frame. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime entirely. Jake's arm tightened around her waist. The best 10 years of my life, though I suspect the next 10 might be even better. Rebecca turned to face him, her beauty only enhanced by the passing years and the confidence that came with her accomplishments. Even with all the gray hairs these children are giving us, Jake laughed, touching a strand of silver that had appeared at his own temple. Especially with the gray hairs. We earned everyone. From the yard came William's excited shout as he discovered a frog near the garden pond, followed by Emma's delighted squeal. The children's joy, so pure and uncomplicated, never failed to remind Jake and Rebecca of life's most precious gifts. "I received a letter from Marcus Davis yesterday," Rebecca said after a moment, her voice thoughtful. Jake stiffened slightly. Though the Davis brothers had been released from prison after serving 8 years of their 20-year sentences, they had left Idaho territory, reportedly settling in Oregon under assumed names. "What did he want?" "To apologize," Rebecca replied, surprise still evident in her tone. "He wrote that he's dying consumption, most likely, and wanted to make amends before the end. He admitted to everything, Jake. The fraud, the attempted framing, all of it." Jake absorbed this unexpected news. "Do you believe him? That he's truly repentant?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. "I think so. He enclosed this with the letter." She withdrew a folded bank draft from her pocket. "It's for the amount my father allegedly owed him, plus interest. He wants it to go to Sarah's school for girls." After Sarah's return from San Francisco, she and her husband had established a small academy in Shoshone for girls interested in pursuing higher education or professional training. The school, named after Rebecca and Sarah's mother, had quickly become a source of pride for the entire community. Jake examined the draft, noting the substantial amount. "What will you do?" "Accept it," Rebecca decided. "Not for his sake, but for the girls who will benefit. Maybe some good can finally come from the Davis legacy." Jake nodded, understanding her reasoning. It was characteristic of Rebecca to find the positive possibility in even the darkest circumstances. It was one of the countless reasons he loved her. As dusk deepened into evening, they called the children in for supper. The ritual of family dinner was sacred in the Northcott household, a time for sharing the day's events, for laughter and learning, for strengthening the bonds that connected them. Later, after William and Emma were tucked into their beds with stories and kisses, Jake found Rebecca in their bedroom, brushing her hair before the mirror. He paused in the doorway, taking a moment to simply appreciate the sight of her, this remarkable woman who had transformed his life in ways he was still discovering. "What?" she asked, catching his reflection as he watched her. Jake crossed the room to stand behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "I was just remembering something my father told me when I was about Will's age. He said that the measure of a man isn't in how much land he owns or how much money he makes, but in how well he loves." Rebecca set down her brush, turning to face him. "Your father was a wise man. He would have adored you," Jake said with certainty, "and these amazing children you've given me." Rebecca rose to her feet, her arms encircling his neck. "That we've given each other," she corrected gently. "Everything we have. Jake, our home, our family, our work we've built together." He kissed her then, with all the tenderness and passion of their first kiss, and the depth of understanding that only a decade of partnership could bring. When they finally parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed as always by the magnitude of his good fortune. "I used to wonder," he confessed softly, "if I'd ever find my place in the world, where I truly belonged." Rebecca smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight and something infinitely more precious. "And did you find where you belong?" Jake gathered her closer, his answer simple and absolute. "Right here. With you. Always with you." Outside their window, the stars emerged one by one in the vast Idaho sky, witnesses to a love that had endured trials and separation, that had created life and built a legacy of service and compassion. A love that had begun on the day a determined cowboy kicked down a jailhouse door and changed the course of two lives forever. And in the quiet of their bedroom, Rebecca and Jake Northcott held each other close, grateful for the past they had shared, content in their present happiness, and full of hope for the many years that still lay ahead.